Welcome to my HD production skills vlog. Okay, so I'm going to start with health and safety. The main thing you need to do is fill out a risk assessment. In order to do that, you need to fill out a few steps. Step 1 is to identify all the hazards. Most common hazards are electricity, hazardous substances, manual handling, noise exposure, and stunts. Once you've identified the hazards, step 2 is to look at the groups particularly at risk in order to make them especially safe. Step 3, for each hazard identified in step 1, an assessment should be undertaken. You need to identify the control measures that you need to put in place. Control measures are what you do in order to lower the risk of an accident. So these could be elimination, training of staff, improved procedures, and personal protective equipment. Next, you need to complete the assessment risk rating matrix, which aims to standardise records and prioritise items for action. The matrix is likelihood of harm versus the severity of the harm, and it's judged as risked low, medium or high. So for example, if the likelihood was possible and the severity was severe, you'd have about a medium risk. If you've got a low risk, it's considered acceptable, you don't need to do anything. If you've got a medium risk, some additional control measures may need to be required to reduce it to possibly lower risk. But in environments such as studios, it's normally deemed as reasonable. If you've got a high risk, it requires immediate action. It must be referred to a responsible lecturer, and it mustn't go ahead until controls are implemented to reduce the risk. So step 4 is assessor and manager sign off. It can't be signed until it's complete. The assessor must ensure the assessments are fully communicated to everyone involved. Location sound, starting with types of microphone. An omnidirectional microphone picks up sound coming from all directions. While this is useful, they pick up more acoustic feedback. Directional microphones work on a pressure gradient principle. Instead of just responding to the pressure on the front of the microphone capsule, they also depend on the difference in pressure on the front and rear of the diaphragm. Pressure zone microphones produce a very flat, smooth polar response, which is good for stage use. Positioning microphones. One of the optimal placements for the mic is about 1 to 3 feet away from the sound source. It's helpful to put the mic slightly above or below the sound because it helps eliminate certain sound irregularities. If the mic is too close, it could result in an artificially bass-tilted sound. If the mic is too far, it will pick up too much acoustic feedback and ambient noise. Radio transmitters. Radio transmission occurs when sound or pictures are transformed into sine waves and transmitted. To receive a radio transmission, you must have an antenna, a tuner, a detector, an amplifier, and a speaker. When stations hit the antenna, they alter the magnetic and electric fields along the length of it to transfer the electromagnetic wave into the receiving radio. Noise. To minimise background noise levels, there are a few things you can do. You can turn off as many machines around you as you can to reduce hum. If you're indoors, close all the windows. And also turn off all mobile phones so the signals don't interfere with the audio feed. Okay, so moving on to location lighting. Starting off with a few health and safety things to look out for. Use gloves when you're touching the hot lights. Tape down the cables for less tripping hazards. And to unplug the lights and allow them to cool down before packing them away. So hard and soft sources of light. Hard light often creates hard, sharp-edged shadows, whereas soft light is more diffused and evenly spread out. This can be done naturally with the weather outside, so if it's a really sunny day, you're going to have hard light. If it's a cloudy day, you're going to have soft light. Or it can be done artificially using a softbox for soft light, or spotlights if you really want a harsh light with harsh shadows. Okay, colour temperature. Colour temperature is the colour of visible light. It's measured in kelvins. It's necessary in the camera because the human eye can change its perception of reflected colour automatically, but cameras and screens can't. The equipment's given help by giving the camera a reference to pure white. To change it, you can change the white balance on the camera, or you can use coloured gels if you'd like to correct the colour. The inverse square law. The definition is any physical law stating that some physical quantity of strength is inversely proportional to the square of the distance from the source of that physical quantity. Okay, so what it does is it teaches us how light works over distance and why the distance between your light source and your subject is so important. So for an example, if a subject is 1 meter away from the light source and then you double that distance to 2 meters, you naturally think that you've lost half of the light power. You naturally think, oh, it now has half power because you've doubled the distance. But that is wrong. The inverse square law says the power of the light will be inversely proportional to the square of the distance. So if we take the distance of 2, because of the 2 meters that we've now got, and we square that, it's 4. But the inverse of 4 would be 1/4. So you actually get 1/4 of the power, not half power. So originally at 1 meter, you move it to 2 meters, and you think you've lost half power, but you're actually only on 1/4 of the power you had. Okay, grayscale. This is a range of shades of grey without apparent colour. The darkest possible shade is black, which is the total absence of transmitted or reflected light. The lightest possible shade is white, which is the total transmission or reflection of light at all visible wavelengths. Intermediate shades of grey are represented by equal brightness levels of the 3 primary colours. So that's red, yellow and blue. And that's for transmitted light. Or for reflected light, use equal amounts of the 3 primary pigments, which are cyan, magenta and yellow. Types and functions of light. The key light. This is normally the main light on the subject. It will generally be the brightest light in the scene. It is generally placed in front of the subject and sometimes off to the side. The fill light is used to fill in dark shadows that the key light creates. It's placed on the opposite side of the subject to the key light, and it's generally less intense. The backlight is placed in the back of the subject to light it from the rear. This will provide a light ring around the edges of the subject, which separates it from the background. Background light can be used to light the background of the subject. It's generally placed behind the subject and aimed towards the background of the scene to add depth. And finally, practical lights, which are lights that can be seen within the scene. So these are like lamps, lighting decorations, which is good because they can double as decorations as well as sources of light. Finally, location conventions. The main aim for the location is generally for it to look natural. If you have a large room, it will soak up lots of light, so windows and ceiling lamps are very handy. If the furniture, curtains or walls are dark, large light instruments will be needed to bring the light level up to an acceptable exposure. Location HD cameras. Settings and menus. So basically I'm just going to point out what all the buttons are on a Canon DSLR. So you have the shutter button, the mode dial, the flash button, focus mode switch, stabilizer button, zoom ring, on-off switch, delete button, flip screen, live view button, menu button, play button. Aperture. The basic idea is that light reaches your camera's sensor through a hole. The larger the aperture, the more light gets through to the sensor, so that affects the exposure of your image. To measure aperture, there are f-stop numbers. In this, we divide the focal length by the effective diameter of the hole. The larger the f-stop number, the smaller the hole. So f-stop 16 is a smaller hole than f-stop 2. Depth of field. Aperture is one of the most powerful factors controlling depth of field. For minimum depth of field, use a large aperture like f-stop 2 to make your main subject sharp against a blurred background. A smaller aperture like f-stop 16 will make more of the background in focus and a larger depth of field. Shutter speed. The shutter speed on a camera for normal operations opens for 1/60th of a second. Higher shutter speeds appear to sharpen the image in individual frames as they minimize motion blur. Motion blur, however, is useful in the frame-to-frame relationship, and without it the image can appear jerky. Lenses. You can get many types of lenses. I'm going to start by looking at focal length. Focal length is defined as the distance from the optical center of the lens to the focal plane of the video camera when the lens is focused at infinity. Any object in the far distance is considered to be at infinity. Focal length is generally measured in millimeters. Zoom lenses. Most video cameras today use zoom lenses. The effective focal length of a zoom lens can be continuously varied, taking it from a wide angle to a telephoto perspective. Prime lenses. Prime lenses come in more specialized forms, such as super wide angle, super telephoto, and super fast. Each has a fixed focal length. White balancing. White balance is the process of removing unrealistic color casts, so that objects which appear white in person are rendered white in your image. Proper camera white balance has to take into account the color temperature of a light source, which refers to the relative warmth or coolness of white light. Time code is used for synchronization and for logging and identifying material in recorded media. The camera assistants will typically log the start and end time codes of shots, and the data generated will be sent onto the editorial department for use in referencing those shots. The clapperboard. This is used to assist in the synchronizing of image and sound, as well as to designate and mark particular scenes and takes recorded during a production. Shot composition. There are 5 basic rules in shot composition. The first is simplicity. Concentrate on a few basic elements. That way you can focus the viewer's attention where exactly you want it. Secondly is the rule of thirds, which is the idea that each shot should be composed of 3 different spatial elements. Third is balance. Balancing colours is essential. Shots that focus heavily on primary colours tend to be more dramatic. Too many high energy colours can distract the viewer. Fourth is framing. This requires the inclusion of elements that give perspective to the main focus. It's about including certain elements and omitting others. Finally, fifth is lines. Natural lines can give an added sense of depth and perspective. They can also be used to draw attention to the focal point of the shot. Monitoring and testing. Waveform monitoring. A waveform monitor is a device that monitors television signals over time. A television receives video signals as a series of lines. The order of these lines and the way they are scanned is referred to as raster patterns. In order for the TV signal to be clear, the raster pattern used by the TV must match that used by the transmitter. SMPTE color bars. This is a test pattern to show if video signal has been altered by recording or transmission, and what adjustments must be made to bring it back to specification. In order from left to right, the colors are grey, yellow, cyan, green, magenta, red, and blue. Vectorscopes. A vectorscope is a special type of oscilloscope used in both audio and video applications. It displays an XY plot of 2 signals, revealing valuable details about the relationship between these 2 signals. It graphically displays the colour parts of a video signal, precisely showing the colour's strength and hue. Setting up a monitor. To do this, you need to get the SMPTE colour bar feed on the screen. Switch off the red and green colours, and there should be 4 vertical blue bars, separated by 3 darker bars. There should be a small rectangular area under each of them. By adjusting the hue and chroma controls, you should be able to make each of the blue bars match the small area below it. Switch the red, blue and green colours back on. Below the red bar there should be 3 narrow vertical grey bars. Switch the colour/monochrome switch onto monochrome on the monitor. Reduce the brightness control until the centre grey bar just disappears from the screen. Adjust the contrast control until the white reference square at the lower left of the screen is bright enough to appear white. Switch the colour/monochrome switch back to colour on the monitor and it's now set up and ready to go. So moving on to post-production. Non-linear editing systems. This is computer software that lets users edit in a non-destructive way. Non-destructive editing is when the original content is not modified. Inexpensive non-linear editing systems are Apple iMovie, Windows Movie Maker, Adobe Premiere Elements, and some expensive ones are Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, and Avid Media Composer. Digitization. This dramatically altered post-production with new editing and effects capabilities emerging all the time. Digital technology and computer-based editing systems allow for clearer pictures and smoother editing techniques, constantly improving picture quality. Digital video processing. This uses hardware, software, and combinations of the two for editing the images and sound in video files. The desired effects can be produced by editing frame by frame or in larger batches. Video files are obtained from the device by a USB cable or a FireWire attachment. Before applying the filters used in video processing, certain programs require information for optimization framework. This information allows the program to calculate the horizontal and vertical gradients, also to determine the desired filter gradients and establish function parameters. Digital audio processing. An audio signal is converted into digital information, often binary code, which can be interpreted by a computer. Digital audio processing is more popular than analog processing because it allows for greater control of the audio signal. File naming and organizing. It's important to make sure everything is on one drive and that when labeling folders it's intuitive and makes sense within the project you're creating. If you're looking for a specific shot or graphic, you don't want to spend time digging around for it. The ideal folder structure includes folders like your footage with subfolders saying the dates of the shoot, edits, graphics, audio, images. Metadata. This is basically data that describes other data. Meta is a prefix that in most information technology uses means an underlying definition or description. It can make finding and working with particular instances of data easier. So that's the end of my HD production skills vlog. So thanks for watching.